Hey everyone, welcome to part two of PowerPoint on the 20s economy. I started the last one with these two questions: why was the economy of the 20s so good, and why did it fall apart? The answer is somewhat similar. The same factors that made it such a boom helped contribute to its dismantling in the late 20s. And I went through these reasons very quickly: overproduction, inequality, consumers being overextended, farmers, speculation, and I'm going to add a new one: high tariffs. It's not a new one, it's just not one I had on the list. I'm going to go through each of those things now. Um, just remember that the um, Great Depression was poverty amidst plenty, and I'm setting my timer here, or stopwatch. Um, so in terms of overproduction, the U.S. economy had changed a lot since the 1800s. We had become a powerhouse in terms of production, and we had started to develop a middle class. And that middle class became the key to the ups and downs of the business cycle. If you remember what the business cycle looked like, that was that, you know, up and down of expansion here and then contraction here. And consumers become the key to that, or demand becomes the key factor in the business cycle. And in another lecture later, I will talk about how there's the supply side of an economy and a demand side of an economy, and focusing on demand becomes the way that governments deal with economic recessions. From the 30s, the Great Depression, up through whatever we're going through right now, where um, as I'm making this lecture, Congress is trying to pass a stimulus package to stimulate demand. But as we can talk about another time, this economic difficulty we're in right here is unlike any we've encountered um, I think, in the economy before. Inequality is an issue as well. About the top, say, 5 or 10% of the country own most of the country's wealth. And this is a problem economically because rich people can consume a lot. They can have multiple homes, they can buy multiple cars, but um, the middle class as a whole is much better at consumption because a family, a household that's very, very wealthy can only consume so much. And if that wealth were more distributed, it would actually do more for demand, to have it spread out and to have a bigger middle class. The fact that our middle class is still a little small, it's growing, but it's still small, is going to limit um, the ability of the consumers to keep buying. So inequality limits consumption. Um, Another factor is that consumers become overextended. People had been buying based on rosy assumptions that, excuse me, the economy would keep climbing. And that happens pretty much anytime there's a boom time. You'll see people predicting, well, that the economy's changed and there's no reason this ever has to go down again, but inevitably it does. And so people had borrowed a lot more, assuming they'd be able to pay it off. They had um, home mortgages become um, a much more common thing. People had generally rented um, prior to that, and as they move into the middle class, they're buying homes and spending more on mortgages. They are starting to buy cars, and a lot of those are done with car loans. And even appliances were being bought on credit. All those things I talked about in the last lecture. Often there would be installment buying where you put a down payment down and then make monthly payments after that. And so, um, without realizing it, there was a lot more debt, and people couldn't had purchased more than they could afford to maintain, and that had to end. Farmers in rural areas. While we were still in school, I talked about how um, Farmers had done really well in World War I, that crop prices were high because there was limited farming being done in Europe, and so America was supplying both American food needs and European. Um, but in the 20s, the boom was really an urban thing. Farmers and everybody in rural areas did not really benefit from the prosperity. And after World War I, crop prices, fell and never recovered. So if you look at farm prices in the 20s, they did not go up. And so farmers didn't have great income. Farmers struggled throughout the 20s. The individual solution is that when prices go down, individually farmers tend to produce more because they're trying to make up for their falling income. But industry, or for all of agriculture, or like all of wheat or corn, the result of that is overproduction and prices fall even more. So it becomes a problem that compounds itself. By the end of the 20s, farmers were far behind urban people. There was a big gap. Um, Whereas most urban areas had received electricity and had all those modern appliances powered by electricity, um, and wider availability of cars, in the rural areas, many parts of the country still lacked electricity, and they were running on kerosene or lamps of some sort, and didn't necessarily have water, indoor plumbing, and they had missed out on that consumer revolution entirely. So you very much have a gap in terms of living standards between the rural areas and the urban areas. Speculation. I just want to talk about what speculation is. Uh, if you buy a building, commercial building, there are two ways to make money off that. You can keep the building and get tenants to be inside it, stores and shops or renters and apartments, and get rent from them. That's one way. The other way is to just wait for the price to go higher and then resell the building. That second way is speculation. It's like flipping a house that you're all familiar with, where you are relying on the idea of the price going up for you to make money. That's called speculation. It works as long as prices are rising. So if home prices are rising, then flipping houses makes sense. If stock prices are rising, then buying and selling stocks over the short term makes sense, not worrying about holding them for the long haul. It's a bad strategy when the bubble bursts and prices fall. So you can talk about a real estate bubble or a stock market bubble. When that bubble bursts and prices have gone ahead of demand, there will be a quick fall, and people who have been speculating are going to get hurt. In the late 20s, there was a lot of speculation in the stock market. Owning stocks became much more widespread, although I would say most Americans did not own stocks. Enough people did that when the stock market bubble burst, it made problems worse. The stock market crash in October 1929 definitely did not cause the Great Depression, but it did add to it and really triggered the worst parts of it. High tariffs. In the 20s, many countries around the world raised their tariffs to help protect their industries while they rebuilt after the war. This squeezed international trade. So those are all the factors that led to the Depression, and I'll just talk briefly about how they all combined together to lead to a cascade of problems. There was less international trade. The farming and rural sector lagged behind. As farmers struggled to pay farm loans, that's really where the problem began first, and mortgages. Banks began to falter, especially banks in the Midwest. And they are going to stop loaning money and make depositors worried that they're not going to have, they're going to lose their money in the banks. Second or third, consumption begins to fall as the middle class cannot maintain the buying and demand that they had. as demand begins to fall because of those sets of problems, factories start to scale back production and lay off workers. Um, Add into that the inequality means that um, the rich don't add enough to demand. So now you have falling production, rising unemployment, and a downward spiral where all those things just make everything worse. Falling production leads to more unemployment, leads to less demand, which leads to even further falling production. As the economy began to slide, confidence fell and the stock market bubble burst. And so the stock market crash is definitely the final trigger. We're at about 10 minutes, so I just want to add in some. No, I think I'll stop there. I will add another lecture in the coming days. Hope you guys are good. Bye.